So I'll just share my screen. Okay, just to give, so I won't take long. It's just just to give a just a brief this thing about what this center is. So we are a recently established center at Atal Incubation Center (CCMB), and it's a joint collaboration between Atal Incubation Center (CCMB) and Humane Society International India. And this center was established last year to enable more human relevant research in India. And basically our activities, we have been involved in quite a few activities over the past 1 year, and mainly we have worked on few white papers, 3 white papers in the last 1 year, where we have looked at what are the issues and what is the status of research and various human relevant methodologies such as organoids, organ-on-chip, network-based methods and predictive modeling, and so some of these methods, and to understand what the challenges are to pursue this kind of research in India, and to provide recommendations on how we can further enable this research. We also conduct regular workshops and webinars to increase awareness in this area. And this webinar series is one such example where for the past 4 months, this is the 4th webinar, where we have been conducting a monthly webinar with various speakers who are doing currently who are using these methodologies in India, to discuss what is the status of these methodologies in India, and how researchers are currently using them. And we also, in the past 1 year, we've also given out a grant, and we also written a few reviews and popular science articles, again to increase general awareness, because not many students and early career researchers are aware of these new methodologies and how they are being used, and what are the and how they can be currently used in India. So mainly just this brief introduction, and now I would also like to thank Dr. Dey and Nandini that they agreed to be a part of this webinar, and hopefully we'll have and we look forward to hear both of their talks. So yeah, thank you. So I'll stop sharing, and I'll request Dr. Dey to start sharing her presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Surat. So now I request Dr. Dey to just share his screen. So just a brief introduction about Dr. Dey. So Dr. Dey has finished her PhD from the Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur. Then later she had done a postdoc from the Frederick Alexander University from Germany. And then now she's a professor. She's assistant professor at the Institute of Biotechnology and Bioinformatics at the Savitribai Phule Pune University. So I welcome Dr. Nandini and I welcome Dr. Dey, and I ask her to start her presentation.
Thank you, Sam. I think everybody can hear me. And first, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Surat and Sam for this kind of collaborations and organizing this kind of seminar. Most of us are willing to understand that what are the new techniques are available, and what are the new methodologies that we can use to understand different disease, different problems. But unless until we will not see the new techniques, or we will not see them like happening in India, it will not take the speed, or it will not take the momentum to carry on. So today I'm going to talk about the tumor metastasis 3D and beyond. To start with, what I can show you that this is one of the major statistics that I want to start. This is about the prevalence of cancer, and then we can see that the mortality rate is quite high. And to start with, we can see the graph, the map on the, yes. So now we can see here that this is the ranking of the cancer related mortality throughout the world. We can see in different first world countries, mostly North America and Australia, and then in Europe, it is the first cause of death. As we can see, India and other countries, we belong to that 5th positions, where like the cancer related deaths are coming at the 5th to 10th most death causing reasons. If we look into the distribution of what type of cancers are actually killing people, we can find out that in case of male, we find out that the prostate cancer and the liver cancer are one of the important cancer that is causing the most mortality, followed by the oral cancer in case of India. If we look into the female population, we find out that breast cancer is the most prevalent cause of death. We got this information from Globocan 2018, so this is quite recent data. And you can see that the cancer is everywhere, and we can find out that if we do some kind of analysis, we will find out that it is one of the most leading cause of death worldwide, followed, it is only being surpassed by the heart or cardiac related disease. However, we used to have a conviction that cancer-related deaths are mostly caused by metastasis. So we generally say that 90% of the death or 95% of the cancer-related death are caused by metastasis. There is a new study by Dilekas et al. In 2019, where they have done one analysis in Norway specifically, and they find out that it is not exactly true. 90% of the people are not dying because of cancer. The patients are not dying because of cancer, but it is more or less 60 to 70% of the people that they are dying because of cancer. Though sounds like, okay, we cannot put 90% of the death because of metastasis, still the number is quite high. 70 to 75% people are dying because of metastasis. So what is this metastasis? Metastasis is the process where the primary cancer actually travel, the cancer cells will travel, and then they will find out new organs, new homes, such as if somebody is having breast cancer, the breast cancer cells can migrate, and then they can find out their new home in lungs, in bone, in other organs. And in most cases, these new metastatic niche or these new small tumors, they remain in a dormant condition. When the primary tumor is cleared from the body, maybe because of surgery or chemotherapy, then this newly formed, we call them as occult tumor, they will grow. And then they will cause like a complete attack on the whole system, and then the person will die. So we want to study, like if we want to understand, if you want to understand the cancer, and if you want to minimize the mortality because of it, we want to understand the metastasis, and we want to minimize the death caused by the metastasis. So how we can study metastasis? Like if it happens inside the body, what are the techniques that you can use, and what are the protocol or what are the methodology you can use? So if we see metastasis, if we bring it down to the bare minimum, we can see that it is basically a cell migration. Okay, so if we can understand that how the cells are migrating, what modality they are being used, what kind of molecule they are using, what kind of pathways they are using, so that can give us the information that how we can stop them. Okay, so we need to understand the metastasis process, we need to understand the protocol, or we need to understand the methodology, and then only we can create and test different inhibitors that can inhibit metastasis. And at some point, maybe if we can create some inhibitor molecule, we can inhibit the metastasis and probably can minimize the death caused by cancer to a minimum number. What are the technical or what are the quantifying things that we can study if we want to study the cell migration? We can study the migration speed, like whether the speed is being inhibited, the directionality, like how the breast cancer cells, they will identify the bone tissue or they will identify the lung tissue, and the efficiency, like if you are using certain inhibitors and these cells bypass that inhibitor. So this kind of analysis we need to do. And for this kind of studies, we have till now these three platforms. We have this 2D platform, 3D platform, and the animal models. So as my talk is mostly based on 3D platform, we're going to talk about it later on. First, I want to talk about a little bit about what is 2D platform and what is the animal model that we can use for this kind of study. So here you can see these images. So these are the two depictions of schematic depictions of the basic in vitro 2D study that we can do if we want to analyze the cell migration. So one is the scratch assay, where you simply grow some cells, you make a confluent monolayer, and you create a scratch on that layer by either using mechanical scratch, by using a pipette, or you can use a small insert so that the cells will not grow at that place. And then we remove that insert and let the cells come to each other and fill that void or fill that gap. So this is one way of studying the cell migration in a 2D environment. You can use different inhibitor, you can use different molecule to minimize their migration or see that whether those inhibitors are actually can stop these migrations. And this way you can study. Another process is that chemotactic migration, or we call it as a transwell or Boyden chamber analysis, where you use an insert with some porous membrane. You seed the cells on top of it, and you use certain, because you can see from the name, it is self-explanatory, that you will use certain chemotactic molecule on the bottom, and then the cells from top will squeeze through those porous membrane structure, and then they will reach the bottom followed by the chemotactic gradient. So it sounds very, what I can say, it sounds very self-explanatory. It's very easy. It's very intuitive. It's cost-effective. It's very basic structure. However, there are certain cons of these protocols, that you cannot study the interaction between these cells. You cannot use multiple types of cell in this kind of analysis. You cannot see a directional migration, because here they will migrate towards each other. Here they will migrate towards the chemotactic source. So other than that, you cannot see that whether the cells are intentionally migrating towards certain end. Along with that, you cannot study different mode of migration. So that will be interesting, that what is the different mode of migration. When people are studying the cancer migration or metastasis, they have found out that the cancer cells can have, or they can choose to have any kind of migration they want. It is namely, they can go for a epithelial migration, they can go for a mesenchymal migration, as well as amoeboidal migration. So in this kind of experiment, you cannot study that what kind of migration is happening specifically, because this is mostly happening in a collective cell migration. And in this case, you are mostly having a single cell, that is the amoeboidal migration. So you cannot do that plasticity analysis as well. So then people will ask, what about the animal model? In animal, you can do most of the things. If you use a mouse model, because mouse are the favorite animal for cancer biologists, and we can inject the mouse in their peritoneal cavity, in their tail vein, by different cell lines, and those cell lines will grow and make the tumor inside the mouse, and then you can study whether the cells are now migrating towards different organ, and so on and so forth. But here the catch is that though it mimics our in vivo system very well, it can give you the information about what kind of other cells are being used, what kind of chemokines can be used. It is highly expensive. Okay, very few lab in India can afford to have a mouse system or a mouse facility and then do this kind of experiment. Obviously, at the end, you have to kill the mouse. And then you need specific expertise, like how to inject, how to rear them, and how to maintain them. You cannot control what kind of migration mode is happening there. And the interesting thing is, whatever the cancer cell that you are using, they are of human origin. So the mouse, because they are of different origin, the mouse will tend to reject those cells. And to minimize that possibility that the mouse will not reject those cells, you have to use immunocompromised mouse. So immunocompromised mouse, that is another problem, because then you will lose a very important aspect of your cancer biology, that is how the cancer cells or how the tumor is interacting with your immune system. So if you are using an immunocompromised mouse, you might overestimate your data, you might get some false positive. So these are the important cons that you can have if you are working with a mouse model. So till now, like people are working on this anti-metastatic drug, people are working on this cancer, like how we can stop cancer. From last 100 years, people are working on this, but till now, we have immense failure. Like 95% of the proposed drugs are being failed in clinical trial. So people are trying to understand that what will cause that may result in such kind of utter failure. So we can see that we do not have any universal model for all the different types of cancer. We cannot have a model which can serve for breast cancer, which can serve for prostate cancer, for oral cancer. we do not have any human relevant model because we barely use some human cells. We are using a mouse model, so they are not at all human relevant. The cells, cancer cells, they have different migration modes. So if you try to stop one migration mode, they can always choose another one to make fool of us. And then they have a high plasticity, like the cells can choose to jump from epithelial to mesenchymal cell migration, from mesenchymal to amoeboidal migration. If you want to stop one path, they will choose another. So all this information, this gives us, we are in a way that we don't have any hope. Like if we continue to do this kind of study, if we continue to do kill more mouse, kill more animals, we will stuck at this point. So we try to understand that, can we understand cancer without killing the mice, without using the in vitro system? So we try to develop a 3D culture system. Now, what is this 3D system? It is simply, you can see that we have added another dimension. Okay, if we culture the cells in a in vitro condition or in a culture flask, we only have the X and Y axis, and that is why we call them as 2D. And here we are using the depth, we are adding the Z axis. So we are calling it as a 3-dimensional culture. How we can think that this 3D is a better thing, because it mimics the most of our tissue, most of our tumors. If we think about solid tumors, they are a 3-dimensional structure. So if we want to mimic them, we need to have a 3-dimensional structure to first go with, and then we can build on that. So till now, people have developed this kind of models. You can use a scaffold-based model where you can use synthetic or natural scaffold structure, and then you can seed the cells on them, and then they can mimic a tumor-like structure. You can use a scaffold-free model where you just let the cells come together, and then they will make a tumor-like structure. Or you can use a hybrid technology where you can use that cellular aggregate and encapsulate them inside certain specific structure or specific gel structure. So we can think that, okay, maybe we will do all these things, but what is the outcome? So here you can see that the cell behavior completely changed if you grow them in a 3D compared to your 2D sample. So here you can see one 2D cell where you can see those actin stress fiber. You can see the cell is having a, it's not having that kind of only apicobasal polarity. If you grow them in a 3-dimensional structure, you can see the morphology of cells have changed drastically. Actin filament distribution have changed drastically. Nucleus morphology also, it tends to change. So all these visible changes are very apparent. Now people are working on this for long, so they have found out that if you see at the level of mRNA, if you look at the level of protein, the profile is also quite significant different. So we prefer the 3D scaffold, a 3D culture, and we just want to get out of that in vitro 2D culture and see whether the 3D culture can make this animal model obsolete. So among these 3 models, our lab, we love the 3D multicellular spheroid. We love it because it's very easy to grow, and it's very easy to see that how it is a better model, because if we look into this 3D spheroid structure, you can see it's mimic the tumor very closely. It shows you the pathophysiology of your solid tumor. You can see in that image that your proliferating cells are on the outside, inner cell will be a necrotic zone. You can see the oxygen gradient is changing. You can see the ATP distribution is changing. So in a way, physiologically or pathophysiologically, these spheroids are a good replacement of handling the tumor, or you can grow them. They do not need any kind of extra infrastructure. If you have a animal cell culture facility, you can simply do that. You do not need any kind of extracellular structure or matrix to grow them. However, there is one little bit tiny problem, that not all cells are very amenable for this spheroid formation. But to help in that, we have different companies that help us by providing certain matrix. These matrix are made up of basement membrane extract, and then these membranes, this extract, help certain not so easily spheroid forming cells to forming spheroids. You can use different kind of cells by mixing them together and make this tumor microenvironment or tumor immuno microenvironment in lab. You can grow them by simply collecting the tumor from patients. you can use them in microfluidic setup. So what we are doing, so we have used 3 different cell lines. We have MCF, you know now that it is one of the non-invasive breast cancer cells. We have MDA-MB231, which is an invasive breast cancer cell, and we have a HT1080, which is a fibrosarcoma cells. So we have prepared this tumor-like structure in our lab using the Cultrex medium, which is specific for tumor like spheroid formation. And now we are going to see that whether these structures can be used as a platform for studying metastasis. We have to remember that many people have studied or used this kind of spheroids. We are not the first person to do it. From 70s, people are using these spheroids, but they mostly use this spheroid structure to screen different drugs or do radiotherapy. So they generally, I think if we look into the paper till 2015 or 14, there was no paper where people are using this spheroid-like structure seriously for metastasis-related studies. So we designed our study. We try to understand that whether these structures are better than your 2D culture. So we designed study where we have used a scratch assay or wound healing assay to understand the migration speed and whether it is different from your invasive and non-invasive and invasive samples. So we find out that even if this cell line is invasive, they show no significant difference in migration speed when you do the scratch assay. We can see that HT1080 is like it is also invasive, but it is showing very high speed in the 2D environment. Then we did another study that we made those scratch and then we inhibit certain things. Like you can see, we have used cytocollagen B, we have used blebstatin, and we have used MariaSmart. So for a cell biologist or people who work with migration, for them the names are very known, but the people who have no idea, these are the things that they will inhibit. So cytocollagen B will inhibit actin polymerization, blebstatin will inhibit MMP or matrix metalloproteases. So what are these things? They are the main driving force behind different kind of migration. If you minimize actin polymerization, epithelial migration will stop. If you use myosin, amoeboidal migration will stop. If you use MMP, mesenchymal type of migration will stop. So we did those scratches and then we use these inhibitors and we find out that cytocollagen B is inhibiting all the cells. Blebstatin is only inhibiting MMCF. It is barely inhibiting 231 and it is not inhibiting at all our HT1080, same with the MMP. So it shows that only the cytoskeleton is very important in case of migration, epithelial migration, and blebstatin can inhibit the migration in MCF, MMP can inhibit, but not other cells. Then we did what? We did this, we grow these cells in our Cultrex spheroid formation matrix, and then we create this in migration assay by using a chemotactic molecule, which is laminin, and then again we use these inhibitors. So very interestingly, we find out that MCF is not migrating at all in this invasion matrix, whereas these 2 invasive cells, they migrate quite profusely. So it shows one thing, that if your cell is of invasive type, you can study them, you can analyze them, and their inherent nature of invasiveness, actually it will pop up in your 3D environment. Then we use these inhibitors and then we find out, obviously MCF is not migrating, so there is no point of seeing them. But anyway, we find out that only blebstatin cannot inhibit the migration in MDA231. So it is inhibiting, MariaSmart is inhibiting, and cytocollagen is inhibiting. But in HT1080, none of them can inhibit the migration of this in the sprout formation. So from there, we can think that, okay, so even if they are invasive cells, the utilization of different inhibitors can behave differently. So do we conclude that these invasive and non-invasive cells, they migrate differently in 3D. Migration modality is also different in 3D. And then we want to study that, what about the molecular pathway? So we look into the different proteins that play an important role in all this kind of migration. We used P130Cas, stalin, vinculin, paxillin, FAK. So they are the most important protein that take part in your focal adhesion formation and your migration. So then we find out that in 3D, those molecules expressions are going down. Okay, so this altered expression of this protein or this mRNA can gives us the idea that maybe in 3D the role of these molecules are also altered, and the molecule, their function may be also different. So from there we moved a little bit more, and then we try to stain these structures by different to understand what is the distribution of these molecules. So we stain them with actin staining dye, and we use again the vinculin as one of the focal adhesion protein. And then we find out that in 2D, we can see those actin filaments, we can see those vinculin as a green spot, that is the focal adhesion complex. We barely see them in 3D structure. So you can see them mostly they're present in cytoplasm. The actin, they look like this kind of cortical distribution rather than having this kind of specific fiber-like structure. So we can see also here that in 3D, the distribution of these molecules is also altered physically, and they may play a different role in migration. From there, we moved on a little bit, and then we keep asking that how the spheroid can be used to understand that environmental stress on the migration modality. Because we now know that cancer tumors, they are under different kind of stress inside the body. They are under nutritional stress, they are under metabolical stress, they are also under the mechanical stress. So we want to study that if we create a metabolic challenge for this kind of spheroids, will they behave differently? Because if we create this kind of challenge for a 2D cell, they will simply die. So we want to study that whether these spheroids or whether these kind of structures, whether they survive those kind of stress and whether they give us some information. So what we did, we create different kind of metabolic challenge by removing glucose, removing serum, and removing oxygen from the environment. And then we create different level of this stress. Like at first we are removing the nutrient and the oxygen. Later on, we mix them, like we are removing the nutrient as well as oxygen. Later on, we create another level of stress by using, like we are growing them in those environment, or we are continuously treating them with this kind of stress, and then we want to see how they behave. And then we rescued them, okay? And then we let them migrate in a 2D environment just to see that whether they behave differently or not. So interestingly, we find out that if you use certain kind of stress, such as you are using high glucose but low serum, or you are using low glucose and no serum, so there you find out that the cells are not migrating at all, even if you are rescuing them. So these cells, they remain dormant, okay? Another group, we find out that if you have this low glucose and no serum, but you grow, your stress condition is for minimal time, then the cells will migrate in a single cell migration modality. And then if you grow them in a combined environment, and then you find out that they're using both migration modality, that they're using both epithelial migration or collective migration and single cell migration. So this simple study shows us that even if the spheroid, they look all same, and then if you see the control sample, they always use the collective way of migration. But if you change the environment, if you change the stress level, they behave completely in a different way. So this gives us that idea that if you can tweak, if you can refine your experimental condition, if you can play with them a little bit, these spheroids can give you different kind of data, and then you can pursue them. Along with this study, we got two very interesting things. Like one is that when we use these spheroids and we grow them in a comparatively high stress, okay, so we are seeing that you have a combined stress, we are seeing that the spheroid morphology has altered. Okay, so if this is your control sample, you can see very round, compact structure. We have a very clear periphery, but with increasing stress, you can see their morphology is changing, and now they resemble your MDA231 spheroid, and then they have this irregular boundary and irregular shape. So in a way, if we increase the stress, the non-invasive tumor can look like an invasive tumor. We are yet to find out that whether they have changed their signature or not, but morphologically they behave like now a invasive tumor. And then we increase the stress some more. Okay, so here we have you have treated them for like, let's say 24 or 72 hours of stress, and here we are using the stress for more time, and then we find out that voila, they are not forming spheroid at all. They are not forming the tumor, which is also like the MD231. Like if you grow this M231 in a normal spheroid forming technique, they will show this kind of structure, and they need a special environment to make this kind of structure. So this shows us that if you can make the non-invasive cells stressed, they can now change the tumorigenesis protocol. They can now change the pathways, and then they might behave as a invasive type. Okay, so this is one of the interesting data that we got. And then we keep asking that what is actually controlling this thing, like why they are from forming this kind of beautiful structure, they are now forming this kind of structure, or they are not coming together at all. So we did what? We did the mRNA profiling, because you have to understand that the cells are like, they are very stressed. So we cannot do, you cannot do the experiment by like isolating, because we need huge amount of cells to do that kind of analysis. So we did the mRNA analysis, and we find out that most of these cell adhesion molecules, such as E-cadherin or EpCAM, they are going down. So if you increase the metabolic stress, the cell adhesion molecules, they keep expressing less and less, and that may be the reason that they are not coming together, they are not forming this kind of compact structure. So then we thought that, okay, fine. So we are finding out that E-cadherin is playing an important role, probably here, and EpCAM is also playing an important role in the tumorigenesis. So we look further and we ask, like, what is the role of E-cadherin in metastasis? So we find out that it is a very contradictory, people are getting different contradictory data. Like people are saying that E-cadherin, obviously it's a very important molecule. It will bring these different cells together by making homotypic adhesions. You have to lose E-cadherin, and then you can make those cells invasive, and then it is connected to metastasis or epithelial to mesenchymal transition. However, many invasive cancers, they shows E-cadherin on their cells. So it becomes contradictory, like how these cancer cells are showing E-cadherin on their surface, but then still they're becoming invasive. Okay. So to understand this, like what is the role of E-cadherin, and can we look into this migration from a molecular point of view? We did another experiment. We did identify that what is the level of E-cadherin expression in 231 as in MCF. We can find out that MCF is showing comparatively better expression level. Then we did what? We used these two different cell types, like 231, who is having low E-cadherin, we stain them green. And then we have MCF, which is having high E-cadherin, we stain them red. And then we simply mix them. Let's see what happens. After mixing, you can see that they are forming these beautiful spheroids, where we can find out that there are both cells are participating. So it looks like, okay, 231 is also participating, MCF is also participating, but how to do that? We did the confocal microscopy and did some Z stacking. Then we find out that the 231 cells, that is the green cells, they are mostly present on the surface of these spheroids. They are barely in the inside. So this gives an idea that, okay, so the cells who are having less E-cadherin, they will participate in the tumor formation, but they will remain on the outside. The cells who have huge amount of E-cadherin, they will also participate in the spheroid formation, but they will play the core role, and they will make the core structure. And then we understood that how the invasive tumors or invasive cancers, they have both E-cadherin level positive, but become invasive because those tumors are mostly heterotypic, or they have the cells with different E-cadherin level of expression. Then we let them migrate, and we find out very interestingly that most of these green cells are migrating alone. As you can see that red cells are migrating together. They are having this collective migration, but the green cells are migrating individually because they are probably the leader cell. Then probably they are using any one of the single cell migration modality. we are yet to know what kind of specific migration modality they have used. So this is the way our lab, we are trying to understand the metastasis in a three-dimensional environment. Now you can ask, like, do we like, can we use the spheroid only to do metastasis related study? No, you can use the spheroids to do all kind of experiments. Okay, we are doing tumor heterogeneity related studies, we are doing metastasis related studies. You can use them to study angiogenesis. You can analyze the metabolics of these tumors or how the metabolomics is changing. You can analyze the proteomics. You can even do the tumor immunocrosstalk using these spheroids. Okay, so for us, we really love this structure and we really want to use this structure to understand all these different hallmark or different aspect of tumor behavior, and without using any animal model. And we hope in future we will get back to you with different, like, more advanced data and more interesting informations. So I will wrap up my talk by thanking our funding agencies. We have some grants from DBT, DST, UGC, MHRD, and university grant. This is my group. We have 2 PhD students, and mostly we are working with MSc students. They are being very useful to understand different things. If you want to contact us, you can find us like physically in Pune. And if you want to do it in virtually, you can contact us through mail or through Twitter. And thank you for joining us and listening to the talk very patiently. And now I can answer some questions if there is any.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Day, for the for your presentation. So there are a few questions.
Okay.
We will just take 3 or 4 questions for the interest of time, and then maybe the rest we can take in the end.
Later.
So yeah, so I'll just maybe I'll just read out the questions to you, Dr. Day, so that you are also addressed, so that everyone knows what question we are answering. Okay, so first question is from Sonali. She's asking, what is the mode of tumor cell migration and metastasis? Is it chemotactic involving chemokines?
Yes, so different tissues, like we yet to know that what are the exact chemokines are playing a role, but we find out that if you see the cancer cells, they are migrating towards bone or towards lungs, those tissues are, they are secreting certain kind of homing molecules or homing, what you can call homing proteins, and then those cancer cells are attracted towards those kind of organs very quickly. Okay, because if you have if somebody is having breast cancer, and then if you study that if the cancer cells are in the systemic flow, they are in the blood, so they have the opportunity to reach any place in the body, but they preferentially go towards lung and towards bone. So there must be some kind of a chemotactic gradient or homing molecules that is present. Okay, people, if you study any bone metastasis or lung metastasis related papers, maybe Nandini can tell us also about the lung metastasis. So there you will find out that certain molecules are specific, and if we try to inhibit those molecules, then maybe you can stop metastasis. But interestingly, certain people, they have tried to use those those molecules as a inhibitor for this metastatic inhibition in mouse model. In mouse model, they work very fine. In clinical trial, they failed. So that is one way, like the system that is happening in mouse, the system that is happening in human is different. So we cannot use a human to study all these things. So you need to have a human relevant system to understand more about this chemokine molecule.
Thank you. So the next question is from Ashwini. She's asking, is the secondary cancer site specific for a cancer type, and what kind of signaling decides which sites will the primary cancer cells migrate?
Yeah, I think it is more or less the answer, the previous question's answer will answer it. We generally exactly do not know what are the molecules that is being used, but we can assume that if we do some mathematical studying, we can do some modeling, there you can find out that certain cancer, they prefer certain tissue. Okay, breast cancer, you will never found the breast cancer to move to ovary. Okay, you will most of the time you will find out that they are contained themselves in the mostly the lung tissue, the bone tissue, or sometimes the gastrointestinal tissue. So this selectiveness, what is controlling the selectiveness, we have no idea. We are trying to finding out, but until unless you have, again, you are having a human relevant model, you cannot predict anything.
And also, which one between scaffold-based and scaffold-free spheroids is better to study metastasis, and how close is tumor ECM mimicked in the spheroid model?
Okay, so I am a little bit biased for the spheroid. Okay, because you can use the scaffold-based structure, but then you have to control the scaffold in so many ways. Like you have to control the porosity, you have to control that whether they are not cytotoxic. You have to see whether they are cytocompatible. So all these things are there. That your concentration will move from the cancer modeling study toward the scaffold designing study. Okay, so I prefer mostly the spheroid, because there you don't have, you are not playing with your cells, you are just letting them come together and do whatever they want to do. And in scaffold, you are letting them, like, you should adhere, you should behave this way. So in a way, you are trying to control them. So the behavior of cancer cells will be a little bit different, probably, if somebody compares the scaffold and the scaffold-less model. But personally, I'm biased a little bit towards the spheroid structure. And interestingly, we find out that in those spheroid-like structure, the cancer cells, they produce ECM. Okay, they produce huge amount of ECM, and those ECM, if we let them grow for a long time, they become completely slimy-like structure, and then it will become very tough for us to analyze them. If somebody is willing to understand that what kind of ECM the tumor cells are producing in a three-dimensional environment, this will be the better thing to study. Like this model will be the better thing, because you do not have any artificial scaffold there. You are only having the tumor produce, like whatever the tumor is producing, then you can understand the tumor ECM interactions in a very detailed way.
And then there's another question by Sonali, which glucose starvation converts non-invasive phenotype to invasive phenotype. Will glucose excess revert this phenotype? But glucose excess results in Warburg effect / increased glycolysis, which promotes tumorigenesis. Is this not a paradox? And thank you, lovely talk, she says.
Yeah. So because we are looking into it, we have there are many things that we need to do, we want to do. But preliminary, we find out that if we remove glucose as well as you remove the serum is the protein source, is also playing an important role. And if you remove oxygen, so not single glucose, we cannot say that only glucose in playing an important role to change the profile from non-invasive to invasive. Three of them has to be there. Okay, so you have to having all kind of metabolic or all kind of nutrient scarcity, and then that can cause the tumors to become probably, we cannot say right now that it is becoming 100% invasive. We use a term that is pseudo-invasive, like it looks invasive, but we have to prove that whether it is invasive or not. Interestingly, we find out that if we create a huge amount of metabolic stress, the tumorigenesis is hampered. And then we find out a very interesting paper where there is a metabolic study survey. They said that people with low BMI, that means you have less amount of nutrient in your system, they have very minimal chance of getting cancer. So we are trying to understand that whether that result is having some implications into this. Like if you do not have enough nutrient in your body, maybe tumors will not form. And the other spectrum, we know that if you have more than enough nutrient, you are obese, then you have a high chance of having tumor. But then the other spectrum, we are looking into it, that if you have very less amount of nutrient, or if you have a scarcity of nutrient, you are low BMI, in a way you are slim, so then you have a less chance of getting tumor. But we cannot say anything for sure right now, but this is an hypothesis, and we would like to see more into it. And obviously these are all, like whatever we know now or whatever we are understanding, these are coming from 2D structure or 2D culture. So we cannot say that that is a it is a we are not saying that it is a paradigm changing, but we can say that this identifying a new setup will, maybe it will ruffle some feather, and it will change some hypotheses that we used to believe for long. And maybe it will give us some better opportunity to understand cancer.
So actually there are quite some more questions, but maybe some of them we can answer on the chat box also, because for the interest of time we can move ahead, and towards the end if there's time we can take more questions. So maybe Dr. Dey can type in the chat box and keep answering whatever questions, because I think there is a lot of interest and there's a lot of people are typing in questions. So yeah, but for the interest of time maybe we'll move ahead. Yeah, thank you, Dr.
So
Dey.
I'll now stop sharing my screen, and I can still access the chat box. Okay.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dey, for the interesting presentation and also answering the questions. So now we move on to Nandini's presentation. So I'll just give a brief introduction about Nandini. Nandini has completed her master's from VIT in biomedical engineering, and then she joined the IIT Hyderabad in a joint PhD program between IIT Hyderabad and Swinburne University of Technology. So she has, as of now, she has defended her thesis and waiting for a doctoral degree. So she has expertise in 3D microfluidic devices for studying stem cell and cancer biology. So now I request Nandini to start sharing a screen and give a presentation. You're muted, Nandini. Yeah.
Thank you.
And just another thing, if there are any questions for Nandini, so people can just type in the questions in the chat box, and then we can answer them at the end. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me for this webinar series. I'm very honored and happy to be a part of this. And Dr. Dey, your talk was really insightful, and it was really nice to see how the spheroids are helping in doing the research with respect to cancer metastasis. Unfortunately, my talk is not about metastasis. We haven't gone to that stage yet, but it would be kind of like talking just about the formation of spheroids inside a microfluid device which hosts 3D hydrogens. Okay, so I'll start now. Can everybody hear me properly? Okay. The title of my talk is Embedded Lung Tumor Spheroids in a PDMS Microfluidic Chip for Testing Novel Anti-Cancer Therapies. This work is primarily my PhD research, which has happened in collaboration with Swinburne University of Technology in Australia. And my primary institute is IIT Hyderabad. So just to give you an overview of what my talk would be about. I'm sorry, yeah, some problem with the PPT. So first I'll give you a little bit of background and some literature about microfluidic devices and preclinical testing. Then I would go ahead with the microfluidic device fabrication, since most of the audience is students, and this topic is relatively new in the research paradigm in India. So I'll also discuss about the methodology and materials that I have used to fabricate the device and why I have used them. And then I'll talk about the applications that we have dealt with using this microfluidic device. For example, creating a 3D tumor model inside the device, and then doing anti-cancer screening, and then applying a stem cell therapy against the lung cancer cells. So this has already been discussed by Dr. Dey, but I'll go through it very briefly so that you still have an idea of how the talk is going to happen. There is a problem with the PPT. I don't know this. This is interfering with my PPT. Okay, so evolution of cell culture. 2D cell culture is approximately 100 years old, and 3D cell culture is approximately 60 years old. And microfluidic cell culture is relatively new. People have started using microfluidic devices from 20 years approximately. Microfluidic devices brings microengineering technology with the cell biology, where you have cells growing inside micrometer sized chambers in order to model physiological functions of many tissues, and you can even study cell biology at single cell level. Here, the dimension, which is in micron range, plays a big role in mimicking the in vivo environment, as in you get small volume effects. So if this is a conventional cell culture well, which can have a 2D monolayer or a 3D, hydrogen-based culture, but you have a lot of volume of the media around the cells. But in a microfluidic cell culture chamber, you have uh, smaller dimensions. So that means you have higher surface to volume ratio, which means that whatever growth factors are released by the cells stay around the cells, and that helps in mimicking what happens inside tightly packed tissues, for example, cancer tissues inside the human body. So motivation for my PhD work was anti-cancer preclinical research. As we have seen in the previous talk, cancer is the second primary cause of death worldwide, and there is an increasing need for advanced and inexpensive 3D models that can mimic the in vivo cellular environment. I'm sorry, the PPT is loading pretty slowly for some reason. Yes. So in preclinical research, as discussed in the previous talk, we have 2D models, 3D models, and they have certain drawbacks in that they lack tissue to, 2D models poorly mimic tumor physiology. You have cells growing in monolayer, their morphology does not match, and all the drug screening studies that are done in 2D models fail to show results in human trials. 3D models have overcome a lot of disadvantages of 2D. Lack spatiotemporal chemical gradients. They require large amount of cells and reagents. Whereas animal models come after the in vitro models, and they are very expensive, and they are human, and even the results that are shown by animal models fail to replicate in the human trials. So we need advanced models where we can have we can overcome the disadvantages of all the other models, and in some cases we can actually replace the animal models and use organ on chip or tumor on chip models. I'm sorry, the PPT is okay. So the advantages of microfluidic models, as I have discussed, they use less space for cell culture, and they provide precise spatial and temporal control, which we will see in further slides. They have high scalability and reproducibility. And they significantly use a less amount of cells. So let's talk about the types of microfluidic devices for cell culture.
Do you want to like stop sharing and then start sharing?
Yeah, there is
again?
some problem. I'm not enjoying this.
Yeah, maybe we can. Yeah. Maybe you can try stop sharing and then start sharing again.
Yeah. I think I'm getting a lot of pop-ups by which say that people are trying to join. I don't know if that is interfering. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Just a second. I'll start sharing again. It's not the computer, but somehow the Zoom is doing this. Right. So. Okay. Yeah, this is better. Yeah. So yeah, thank you for suggesting that. So in microfluidic devices as well, we can have different types of cell culture inside. But since all the microfluidic devices are in micron scale, they have overcome a lot of disadvantages of 3D cell culture as well as 2D cell culture, which happens in conventional fashion. So in 2D microfluidic models, we have a monolayer of cells, which is underlaid on the bottom channel and bottom surface of the channel, or we can have a microfluidic, spheroids, which are encapsulated in 2D, collagen or other types of hydrogels, and we can place both of the cells and hydrogel inside the device, like we can do in this fashion, where we have different channels holding hydrogels and different types of cells, or we can have a mixture of two different types of cells in a single channel. So there are a lot many ways where we can arrange we can design the device, and we can spatially organize these gels so that our requirements are met. So these are the examples of some devices which have been present in the literature. This is a lung cancer chip by Donald's lab at Harvard Medical School, where they have designed an orthotopic lung cancer model. But this is example of monolayer of cells placed on the surface of the device. So they do not have the cells encapsulation inside 3D, which depends, of course, on the applications. Then you can have spheroid-based microfluidic models where you have no 3D environment, but just the no 3D matrix and just the 3D spheroid formation inside these, where the cells have collected and they have formed a spheroid. And then you can have cells encapsulated inside hydrogel, and you can place that inside the microfluidic device and let the cells grow and become spheroids, which happens only for certain types of cells, as we will see in the coming slides. So the hypothesis which we had made by doing all the literature search was that microfluidic models have proven as essential tools to establish cost-effective 3D cell culture. For us, cost was a big factor, and 2D cell cultures are unreliable for drug screening at the preclinical trials. So we also discovered that there is no report on microfluidic chip-based lung tumor spheroid formation inside the 3D hydrogels, and there are not many reports where they have tested new types of anti-cancer modalities, such as anti-cancer peptides and stem cell-based therapies. They are done on 3D cancer models, but not on inside the microfluidic device. So we will be covering that in this talk. So next, where I'll discuss is the microfluidic device design and fabrication. So the fabrication process of microfluidic devices starts first with the design. You have a design in your mind depending on what kind of application you have. And you do that in a computer-aided design software, which could be AutoCAD or SolidWorks. And then you use the design and you create a mask or something, and you can 3D print it. In our case, we had developed a photo mask, and we have done master mold fabrication using photolithography. And then using that master mold, you create a lot of microfluidic devices based on the material called PDMS. So this is the microfluidic chip design used in my work, where we have this device which is in the scale of centimeters, but the channels are in the size of microns. And this is the 3-channel setup, where we have the central channel where we want to house the cells in 3D matrix, and the side channels will of course help with the nutrients and removal of waste materials. So what happens here is we have hexagonal posts. So what they are helping in doing is they're providing a capillary burst valve model, where what that means is the cells and hydrogels would be restricted inside the central channel, and this wouldn't leak to the cell culture medium channels. That would provide you the spatial control over the cells and hydrogels. So what we do is we have developed the design, and according to the design, we make a photo mask. Either you can have one unit of the design in the mask, or you can have 4 units so that you can make it slightly high throughput. So this is how the mask looks like, and we will use this in the next step, which is master mold fabrication using UV photolithography. I'll just go through the process briefly so that you become aware of how the fabrication is happening. So you start with a silicon wafer. This is actually, why do we call it, why are we using microfluidic terms and microengineering, is because this is borrowed from the silicon chip fabrication process. So we use a photoresist and we pour it on the clean silicon wafer, and by spin coating it, we get a certain thickness of the film of the photoresist. This thickness, of course, depends on the this height of the channel which you want. So I wanted 200 microns. So I have approximately got 200 micron thick photoresist coat. And after that, we dry the photoresist by soft baking. And then we use a photo mask, which we place on top of the wafer. and photoresist. And in this case, we have used where we had 4 copies of the same chip. We UV expose it. What happens during UV exposure is we are cross-linking the photoresist, and wherever there is no black regions, that from there the UV passes through and cross-links the photoresist. This process of cross-linking is uh, uh, accelerated using heating, which is called post-exposure bake, and that ensures that the entire region of the channel is cross-linked. And then we develop the rest of the area which was not exposed to UV, and it can be washed away using the SUA developer. And what we get is we get only the channels on the silicon wafer, which looks like this. So we have this final master where you have the pattern on the on the silicon wafer, and you have 4 copies of it. So at close, it looks like this. So we have these, what you call bells, trenches of the hexagonal pillars, but in the replica, they should actually look like this, which can actually hold the gel. So these are the dimensions which are very close to what we had designed. Next step, in brief, we will discuss. This is actually simpler than the previous step. This is called replica molding. It's a process in soft lithography, where we take the master and we pour this polymer on top of the master, and we degas it, remove the bubbles, and then we cure it at certain temperatures starting from 60 to 80 degrees. And this is how PDMS looks like. And we punch it, creating the holes for the reservoirs, media reservoirs, and cell inlets. The central channel is for cells. So it's slightly smaller then, because media reservoirs have been made big so that there is no need for continuous perfusion in our case. This is the final chip with the entire dimensions. There was one more thing which we addressed in our in my PhD work was the silicon masters, as you can see in the pictures, are very costly and fragile. So what we did was we did try to reduce the cost furthermore, and we created plastic masters, which are very durable and long lasting. What we can do is, after we create plastic masters using a commercial material called smooth cast, we can use these plastic masters to repeat the entire process, but will not use the silicon masters again. And they are very good in replicating the micro patterns. So what we do is we'll again use the same process, and this way we can, do not worry about the failure of the silicon master, and produce many PDMS devices for our cell culture experiments. So now moving on to the cell culture experiments, where we have these 3 things to discuss. First, we have created a lung tumor spheroid model. As discussed, lung cancer, causes 1.76 million global deaths, and we have used A549 cells as the model of lung adenocarcinoma, which is a type of non-small cell lung cancer, which causes 85%, which is the reason for 85% of all lung cancer cases. So far in literature, we have seen that we have 2D monolayer or 3D macro models where they have screened commercial drugs. But commercial drugs have certain disadvantages, such as they are cytotoxic to rapidly dividing cells. Cancer cells actually target rapidly dividing cells. That's why they are detrimental to other type of healthy cells, which are rapidly dividing, such as skin, hair follicles, GI tract lining. And cancer cells develop resistance to these drugs over time due to so many mechanisms. So in our collaboration with Swinburne, we have done something new in our microfluidic model, which is we have used the anti-cancer peptide developed by Swinburne University student, Dr. Nadine. She's a scientist there now. What is an anti-cancer peptide? It's basically an antimicrobial peptide, which targets microorganisms based on charge differences. This peptide is named as P1 peptide, and it has the length of 14 amino acids. It's a small chain of amino acids, and it has a net charge of +7. So we can actually use it as anti-cancer peptide, because cancer cells also have shown to have overall negative charge and large surface area to attach. So what we have done in our microfluidic model, we have screened anti-cancer peptides on the model which we have developed. But before that, I'll just show you how the lung tumor spheroid model was made. So we have this media. This is the final picture of the microfluidic device, where you can see in blue the central channel, and it is divided it is separated from the media channels using hexagonal posts, as I have shown you before. They restrict the gel and cells inside the central channel. So this is how they look. We have cells embedded in collagen type 1 hydrogel as single cells. The concentration of collagen they used was 2 milligram per ml, which was referred from the literature, as it is good for growing cancer cells. So as you can see here, we have single cells inside the central channel. And as a healthy cell control, we have used mesenchymal stem cells, which are, as you can see, enclosed here in collagen in the central channel. So hallmark in the literature actually shows that most glandular epithelial tumors show absence of hollow lumen. And similar research has shown that in healthy epithelial cells, lung epithelial cells, when you grow them inside a 3D matrix or on the surface of a 3D matrix, they form this, acini or spheroid-like structure. But over time, the cells differentiate and they form a they undergo luminal apoptosis and they form a hollow lumen. But in case of this adenocarcinoma cells A549, this differentiation capacity is lost because of certain signaling pathways, which I won't discuss here. But that, as you can see, that there is no apoptosis and it just maintains this spheroid structure throughout the cell culture. So similar thing we have seen in our model, where we have encapsulated single cells, but by day 5, we have seen spheroid formation inside the collagen gel. And we have characterized this using ImageJ, and we have seen that number of spheroids which were larger than 35 microns have significantly gone up. And even the diameter has significantly gone up by day 5. And we have confirmed this by confocal microscopy, where we can see that the spheroids are healthy and there are very few dead cells. These are the 3D reconstruction images of the central channel. And this is the close-up of a spheroids where you can see that there is no hollow lumen. There are cells even on the center, in the center, which actually confirms what has been talked as a hallmark of the epithelial tumors. So what we have done is we have, instead of conventional drugs, we have checked the cytotoxicity of the anti-cancer peptide on our model. So what we saw was that there was a selective cytotoxicity. Basically, what that means is there was more than 75% cell death in the cancer spheroids because of the peptide. And but we saw less than 15% cell death in the healthy cell control. So that actually shows what conventional drugs cannot do. And this is a potential anti-cancer drug for the future. And this is a very good thing which we could show in our research. We also introduced the anti-cancer peptide on day 0 of the cell culture. That means we added the anti-cancer peptide when the cells were just single cells. So what we also observed was that anti-cancer peptide prevented the formation of spheroids. Basically, we saw significantly less a number of spheroids, which was also confirmed by immunofluorescence staining of the cell proliferation marker, where we saw significantly reduced proliferation in the group where we had introduced anti-cancer peptide. Okay. So after this, we wanted to test another modality which has been showing promising results, where people say that a certain kind of MSCs have shown, anti-tumor effects on cancer cells. Why is that important? Because the research has shown that MSCs have the tendency to migrate to tumor sites, and other kind of inflammation happening inside the human body. So this is a potential research area where tumor-specific MSCs can target, cancer tissues. But there is still not a clarity on whether MSCs have a pro-tumor effects on anti-tumor effects. Different types of MSCs have shown different results. Adipose tissue show pro-tumor effects. 54% of the times, whereas bone marrow show pro-tumor effects 74% of the times. However, umbilical cord have shown anti-tumor effects 88% of the times. So we wanted to, there was another research where they have shown the study using amniotic membrane mesenchymal stem cells, which have shown promising anti-tumor effects. But those were done before 2012, but there have been studies after 2012 which have shown either they enhance the proliferation of lung adenocarcinoma or they have no effect. So that review paper was 8 years ago, but after that there have been studies which have been very paradoxical. So we wanted to check the same in our microfluidic tumor model using conditioned medium, or also known as secretome of the stem cells. So what we did was we collected the conditioned media from amniotic membrane stem cells, and we also introduced another group called where we treated the AMSCs with hyperthermia. So what is hyperthermia? It's basically a clinical technique where local tumor tissue site is heat treated, which increases the blood flow in the tumor mass and therefore the concentration of the anti-cancer drugs. So these results just show that the treatment of AMSCs at 43 degrees did not cause any morphological changes in the cells. So we have basically 3 groups for this study, where we have one with normal complete medium for the cells, and then we have this co-culture where we have added the conditioned medium from the AMSCs, and another is heat co-culture where we have added with hyperthermia treatment. So what were the effects of the conditioned medium on our microfluidic tumor model? As far as the number of spheroids and spheroid diameter was concerned, as the picture shows, we saw significant enhancement in the number of spheroids in the co-culture model, and as well as significant enhancement in the diameter of the spheroids. However, in the heat co-culture, there was not much difference by day 3, but by day 5, we saw significant reduction in the diameter of the spheroids. This was again confirmed by the cell proliferation marker, which showed the same trend that the AMSCs had enhancement of proliferation in the co-culture group, whereas hypothermia actually helped in reduction of the proliferation in cancer cells. We also tested anti-cancer peptide on these 3 models, and we found that there was significant amount of cell death in the hypothermia as well as monoculture models, and these 2 were slightly comparable. That actually showed that hypothermia actually helps in bringing certain changes in the mechanism of cell death, which could be we have hypothesized certain growth factors which could be responsible for such behavior, but more research is needed onto what actually caused this. But this was certainly interesting to know that this conditioned medium from MSCs could increase A549 proliferation in 3D environment inside the device, and combination therapy using anti-cancer peptide and hypothermia was more effective. So what is in the future? What is the next decade showing? In our cancer model, we have just the 3D microenvironment matrix and the microfluidic and situation, but we can include in the future other types of cancer microenvironment features such as endothelial cells, which could be placed in the media channels as a monolayer, and they could start migrating and forming blood vessels inside the hydrogel and interact with the cancer cells. We can also include cancer-associated fibroblasts, which have been known to enhance cancer growth and metastasis as well. But that would actually need a little bit enhancement or change in the design of the microfluidic device. So that would be another set of experiment. But in the same device, we can definitely include endothelial cells and add certain immune system features as well, which would lead to another level of physiological relevance. We can also make it even more humanly relevant by including primary human cancer cells, which a lot of labs have started doing, as well as primary human tumor stromal cells such as fibroblasts and other type of materials. So all this research is so good, and the results have been so reproducible and beneficial. People have started asking these questions. Whether this is a very recent paper where the question has been asked, which is a very pertinent question: where is it time for reviewer 3 to request human organ chip experiments instead of animal validation studies? Now, it's a question. It doesn't mean that we can do that in all cases. There are certain cases where we actually need animal models, but this is a very valid question indeed, because the results which we are getting from advanced lung on chip models have been very relevant as far as in vivo cancer environment is concerned. So the big picture is, at the end of all the discussions with spheroids and microfluidic spheroid models, is whether we can have better models which can link preclinical trials with the clinical trials, so that when we have certain results from the preclinical trials, we go to human trials and we see some similarity, and we can have more, whatever guesswork which happens, or we see a lot of failures at clinical trials, maybe we would be able to reduce them. So yeah, that is the future of this technology. So at the end, I would like to acknowledge all my lab members and supervisors at IITH, as well as at the lab in Swinburne, Australia, where I've been, where there was a very nice collaboration with the new groups, and my funding sources, MHRD and Supra Fellowships and Nanomission Project by DST India. Thank you, everybody, and I would love to hear your questions now.
Nandini, for the wonderful talk. So we have a few questions in the chat box.
Okay.
And please type in this for all the audience. Like if you have questions for either Nandini or Dr. Dev, please type in and we'll have to take them. So maybe I'll just go through the questions, Nandini. So the first question is by Dr. Sonali. She asks, do you think microfluidic technology can be used to engineer or mimic tumor microenvironment fully?
Yes, definitely. Like I said, we can modify the design. For example, in my design, I don't have a separate microfluidic channels for other type of cancer cells, but of course they can be mixed in the same hydrogel. But to mimic the in vivo environment better, you need to have certain micrometer gap. And there have been studies which have shown similar 7-channel devices for colorectal cancer cells. There are papers. Of course, it can be done. Immune system has been a challenge so far, because we all know immune system plays a very big role in cancer metastasis and overall proliferation of the cells. Those studies are still, they are new, and those are still challenging, how to include them inside the microfluidic device. But yes, it can certainly be done, but a lot of research and a lot of labs have to start work and show that. Yes.
Yeah, I think similar veins is she's asking, is the collagen concentration on the microfluidic device, is it similar to the extracellular matrix in an in vivo animal or human relevant model of cancer?
For the cancer research, as far as the literature says, the concentration which I have used is 2 mg per ml, which is quite relevant as far as the papers have shown me. But I have not made a direct comparison with the original tumor biopsies which are collected. No, I have not done that. But of course, the cells, when they are introduced into the extracellular matrix, they remodel the matrix according to how they are proliferating. So of course, there would be changes mechanically, but we have not calculated them as such. Yes.
Thank you. And I think there's a question for Dr. Dey. This from Sandra. She is asking, for monitoring effects on spheroid diameter, what technologies and processes are you using to harmonize diameters? Do you use specific diameter based acceptable criteria?
Okay, just let me find out the questions. So we have measured the diameter by normal microscopy, phase contrast microscopy, and then we did that aspect ratio analysis.
So I'll just see if there are any more questions. Yeah, Sandra is saying thanks, so I think yes. Okay, there's another question. the peptide sequence seems general and probably could affect any membrane. The lack of effect on normal cells, is it due to its interaction or neutralization by components of secretome of healthy cells?
So this is what I had, the collaboration with Swinburne. They had developed this peptide, and what they had done this research on 2D monolayer of cells, which were HeLa cells, and they had found a membranolytic action, which basically means that they can lyse the cell membrane and enter the cells. And even after lysis, the cell, they undergo necrosis and they die. But we also observed that this peptide has effect on the cell proliferation potential of the cells by entering the cell, and there could be some pathways involved which we have not looked into, but it certainly affects the proliferation potential of the cells. As I said, it's a positively charged peptide, and since cancer cells are relatively negatively charged, so they have this charge-based mechanism which could make them affect the cancer cells more. And since healthy cells are not as negatively charged, they were less affected by it. Of course, we saw certain cell death which was slightly approximately around 15%, but as far as the mechanisms go, we could only guess that it is charge-based, as well as cancer cells have high number of microvilli, which gives more peptides a chance to attack the cancer cells. Yeah, but I don't. We have not studied what could the secretome of normal cells do to the peptide. That was not a part of the research, but yes, that could definitely be looked into. However, we did not observe any such behavior in our images or something like that. Yeah.
There's one last question where Dhanashri is asking for drug interaction studies for cancer. Is there a requirement to have same spheroid size, and will this have an effect?
Is this for me?
This is for, I think, Dr. Dev, because it's talking about spheroids. Should I repeat the question, Dr. Dev? You're muted.
Yeah. So yeah, same size, like you need to have, because if the size is becoming more and then the penetration of drug will get problematic. So for bigger spheroids, maybe the surface, the proliferating cells will die, but the core will not be accessible to those molecules. Compared to if you have a smaller spheroids, then the drug concentration, it can, like if it is, let's say, a 50 micron, the diameter is 50 micron. So then it will killed easily compared to a spheroid which is approximately 200 or 250 micron diameter. So yes, that is one that should be one of the criteria. If you want to use the spheroids to see the drug screening, they need to be of similar size. And people are trying to develop this setup, like they're doing this high throughput robotic setup where they can use exactly the same amount of cells in every well, so that you can get exactly the same size of spheroids for those kind of studies.
Thank you, Dr. De. And there are no more questions. I'd like to, yeah, I think Dr. De just answered how to get a similar size of spheroid.
I think Sandra she also shared some literature to understand like how to control the diameter and all these things.
Right. Yeah. I think Sandra has shared a link where for a paper where some suggestions for controlling the spheroid diameter. Maybe Dhanashri, you can have a look at it, and yeah. So if there are
I'll stop sharing.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
No more questions. Maybe we'd like to thank both the speakers, Nandini and Dr. De, for this wonderful talk, and the audience for the great questions. And I'd also like to say that we have shared a feedback form in the chat box, which the audience can just go through. This just to understand how we can improve this experience further for our future webinars. And yeah, so we'll be having more of these monthly webinars on the similar theme, and and hopefully please I think Sham has reshared the feedback form. So, and if there's anything else, please do let us know. And 1 second, I'll just, yeah, so I'll just share this thing here. So this is, I'll just share. So this is, if you have any more questions regarding any of our initiatives, you can go to our page, or you can go to the Biomed 21 website. Yeah, and please, I'll just, yeah, I think I'll stop there. And thank you, speakers and the audience for this wonderful session.
Thank you so much, Dr. Surat, for contacting us. Yeah, it has been wonderful. 1 year, I think we talked a year ago regarding this. Yeah, I remember the first phone call. Yeah, it has been really wonderful to be in touch.
Yeah,
And I hope it continues in the future. Yes.
Yeah, we'll also be putting a recording of this thing on our YouTube channel. So for anyone who wants to go back and revisit this wonderful session. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thank you all for attending the session and making it a great day today.
Okay. Bye.